Amy Carter floated through the wreckage of Research Station Alpha 7, her breath fogging up the inside of her helmet. The twisted metal and broken glass drifted around her like a graveyard in space. 3 days ago, this place had been home to 200 scientists. Now it was nothing but debris orbiting the blue planet below. Her salvage ship's lights cut through the darkness as she searched for anything useful. Food, medical supplies, data cores, anything that might help the survivors back on the main colony. The oxygen meter on her suit showed she had 2 hours left. Not much time. "Amy, you need to see this," said Aria, her ship's computer. "I'm picking up something big in Section C." Amy pushed off a floating desk and glided toward the coordinates. Section C had been the biology labs. If she was lucky, she might find preserved samples or research data. The colony always needed more information about the local wildlife. When she reached the area, Amy stopped and stared. A massive chunk of the station's outer hull had been torn away, creating a cave-like opening. And inside that opening, trapped under a fallen support beam, was something that made her heart race. It was huge, easily 30 feet long. Its skin was deep purple, almost black, and covered in scales that seemed to absorb the light from her helmet. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that could easily tear through metal. But what caught Amy's attention were its eyes. They were golden, intelligent, and filled with pain. "Aria, what am I looking at?" Scanning now. "Oh no. Amy, you need to leave immediately. That's a void leviathan." Amy had heard the stories. Every spacer had. Void leviathans were the monsters that lived in the empty spaces between stars. They ate entire planets and destroyed whole fleets. The Galactic Council had standing orders to kill them on sight. But this one wasn't destroying anything. It was trapped and hurt. A long gash ran down its side, leaking silvery blood that froze instantly in the vacuum. The creature's breathing was shallow, visible in the way its massive chest rose and fell. "It's injured," Amy said softly. "It's dangerous," Aria replied. "Void leviathans have destroyed 47 colonies in the past century. You need to return to the ship." Amy moved, closer instead. The creature's golden eyes tracked her movement, but it didn't try to attack. Maybe it couldn't. The support beam across its middle section was easily 10 tons of solid metal. Without gravity or leverage, the creature couldn't free itself. Though wound on its side was getting worse. Amy could see where smaller pieces of debris had cut through the scales. In the vacuum of space, the creature was slowly bleeding to death. "I can't just leave it here," Amy said. "Yes, you can. It's what any sane person would do." Amy ignored her computer and pulled herself closer to the trapped creature. Its eyes followed her, wary but not hostile. She'd spent years studying marine life on Earth before joining the colony mission. She knew the look of a frightened animal when she saw one. Moving slowly, Amy reached into her toolkit and pulled out a medical patch, the kind used for hull breaches. It wasn't designed for living tissue, but it might slow the bleeding. The creature watched as she approached its wounded side. "Easy," Amy whispered, knowing it couldn't hear her in the vacuum. "I'm trying to help." She pressed the patch over the worst of the wound. The creature flinched but didn't pull away. The patch sealed against its scales, stopping the flow of silvery blood. Amy applied 2 more patches to smaller cuts. Next came the hard part. Amy pulled out her emergency food rations, NutriPaste tubes that would keep her alive if she got stranded. She had 6 tubes, enough for 3 days. Without them, she'd have to return to the colony immediately after finishing her salvage run. The creature's eyes were getting dim. Whatever these beings ate, they needed energy soon, or they would die. Amy squeezed one of the NutriPaste tubes and let the contents drift toward the creature's mouth. The long, pointed snout sniffed at the food, then carefully took it in. Tsatese effect was immediate. The creature's eyes brightened, and its breathing became stronger. Amy fed it 2 more tubes, watching as some strength returned to its massive form. "Amy, your oxygen is running low," Arya warned. "I know, just give me a few more minutes." Amy studied the support beam pinning the creature down. She had cutting tools, but they would take hours to slice through that much metal. Hours she didn't have, but maybe she didn't need to cut through it all. She positioned herself against a stable piece of wreckage and aimed her plasma torch at the point where the beam connected to the station's frame. The metal began to glow and melt. After 10 minutes of careful work, the connection weakened enough that the beam shifted. The creature immediately pushed against the beam with its powerful limbs. The metal groaned and bent, creating just enough space for the massive being to wiggle free. It floated in the wreckage, flexing its limbs and testing its injuries. Amy expected it to leave immediately. Instead, the creature turned those golden eyes toward her and made a sound that somehow carried through her suit's vibration sensors. A low, rumbling noise that felt almost like gratitude. "Your oxygen is critical," Arya said urgently. Amy gave the creature one last look and began her journey back to her ship. Behind her, she could hear the creature moving through the wreckage, carefully working its way toward open space. When she reached her ship and looked back, the massive form was silhouetted against the stars, seeming to watch her. As Amy sealed her airlock and pulled off her helmet, she wondered what she had just done. She'd helped one of the galaxy's most feared predators. Any reasonable person would say she was insane. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see were those intelligent golden eyes filled with pain and loneliness. "Course back to the colony?" Arya asked. "Yes," Amy said, but she couldn't stop looking at the scanner display. The void Leviathan was still out there, moving slowly through the wreckage. "Arya, start a research file. Subject, void Leviathan behavior." Patterns. "Amy, you're not seriously thinking of just start the file." Outside her ship, something vast and ancient swam through the sea of stars, carrying with it the memory of a small human who had shown kindness when none was expected. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could change everything. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon, staring at the wreckage of Research Station Alpha 7. His crew had been searching for survivors for 6 hours, but so far they'd found nothing except twisted metal and frozen corpses. "Captain, we're getting a signal from the debris field," reported Communications Officer Danny Walsh. "It's a civilian salvage ship." "Put me through." A woman's voice crackled over the comm system. "This is Amy Carter aboard the salvage vessel Little Fish. I'm conducting authorized recovery operations." Jake frowned. Amy Carter was listed as a marine biologist, not a licensed salvager. But the colony needed supplies and desperate times. Called for flexible rules. "Ms. Carter, this is Captain Morrison. Have you found any survivors?" "Negative on survivors, Captain, but I've made another discovery you need to see." 20 minutes later, Jake's shuttle approached the coordinates Amy had provided. What he saw through the viewport made his blood run cold. The massive purple-black creature floating in the wreckage was unmistakably a void Leviathan. and Amy Carter was floating right next to it. "Control your people, Morrison," came a sharp voice over the comm. Admiral Lisa Brooks had arrived with her task force an hour ago, and she wasn't known for patience. "One of your colonists is violating first contact protocols with a Class A threat." Jake watched through his scope as Amy drifted closer to the creature. She was holding out another food tube, and the Leviathan was gently taking it from her hands. The scene was impossible. These creatures were supposed to be mindless killers. "Amy," Jake called over the comm, "you need to back away from that thing immediately." "His name is Titan," Amy replied calmly. "And he's not aggressive. Look at him." "Captain, really look." Jake did look. The creature's eyes were focused on Amy with what could only be described as affection. When a piece of debris drifted too close to the human, one of Titan's massive claws carefully pushed it away. The Leviathan was protecting her. "Carter, you have 60 seconds to clear the area," Admiral Brooks announced. "Then we open fire." "You can't," Amy said. "He's intelligent. He's been trying to communicate with me using light patterns on his scales. These aren't monsters. They're people." 60 seconds, Carter." Jake watched Amy's face through her helmet's faceplate. The young scientist was scared, but she wasn't backing down. She positioned herself between the Leviathan and the approaching warships. "Amy, don't be a hero," Jake said quietly. "Move away from the creature and let us handle this. I won't abandon him. Someone has to speak for those who can't speak for themselves." The Leviathan seemed to sense the danger. Its scales began to glow with soft blue patterns, and it moved closer to Amy. Not to threaten her, but to shield her with its massive bulk. The protective gesture was unmistakably deliberate. 30 seconds, Admiral Brooks announced. Jake made a decision that would probably end his career. "Admiral, I'm calling for a tactical hold. We need to study this situation." "You don't have authority to—" "I'm the ranking science officer in this sector. Under Colonial Charter 15C, I have the right to investigate unknown phenomena before military action." Through his scope, Jake saw Amy place her hand on Titan's snout. The creature's eyes closed peacefully, and the glow patterns on its scales shifted to soft golden hues. It was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen in space. Admiral Brooks' voice was ice cold. "You have 24 hours, Morrison. Then that thing dies." The next several hours were tense. Amy refused to leave Titan's side, insisting that abandoning him now would break the trust they'd built. Jake brought his ship closer and established a defensive perimeter, though he wasn't sure if he was protecting Amy from the Leviathan or protecting both of them from the Admiral. Dr. Carl Thompson, the Horizon's xenobiologist, was fascinated by the footage they'd captured. "Captain, this changes everything we know about void Leviathans. Look at these interaction patterns. The creature is clearly forming social bonds." "Can you prove it's not just manipulating her?" Jake asked. "Watch this." Carl played back a section of video where Amy had accidentally torn her suit on a piece of debris. "See how immediately the creature responds? It positions itself to block other debris while Amy makes repairs. That's protective behavior, not predatory." Meanwhile, Amy was making her own discoveries. Titan had been showing her more light patterns, and she was starting to recognize repeated sequences. Simple concepts like safety, danger, and what she thought might be gratitude. When she tried to mirror the patterns with her helmet light, Titan became excited, his scales flickering faster. "Jake?" Amy called over the comm. "I think he's trying to tell me something important. The patterns keep pointing toward the outer system." "What's out there?" I don't know, but he seems worried about it. As the 24-hour deadline approached, Admiral Brooks' patience ran out. Her ships moved into attack formation, weapons powered and ready. "Time's up, Morrison. Order your colonists to clear the area." Jake looked at the tactical display, then at Amy and Titan floating together in the debris field. The Leviathan had wrapped one of its claws gently around Amy's waist, holding her close. The gesture looked remarkably like a parent protecting a child. "Amy," Jake said softly, "you need to choose. Come back to the ship or face the consequences." Amy's response was quiet, but firm. "I'm staying with Titan." Admiral Brooks opened fire. The energy beams lanced toward the Leviathan, but Titan was faster than anything that size had a right to be. He spun away from the attack, keeping Amy safe against his chest. His scales blazed with angry red patterns as he faced the attacking ships, but instead of fighting back, Titan began to retreat deeper into the debris field. Amy could feel the creature's confusion and hurt through their growing bond. He couldn't understand why the humans were attacking when one of them had shown him kindness. "Stop firing!" Jake shouted. "You're driving them into the asteroid belt." "Let them go," Admiral Brooks replied coldly. "The threat is contained." But Jake knew better. As he watched Titan and Amy disappear into the dangerous maze of spinning, rocks and ice, he realized the real threat wasn't the Leviathan. It was their failure to understand that intelligence came in many forms, and their first contact with a new species had just turned into a disaster. In the asteroid belt, Amy held tight to Titan as they navigated between massive rocks. The Leviathan's scales showed patterns of sadness and confusion, and Amy felt tears freezing on her cheeks inside her helmet. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her massive companion. "I'm so sorry they hurt you." Titan's response was a gentle rumble that vibrated through his chest. Despite everything, he still trusted her. Amy made a promise to herself that she would find a way to show the galaxy who void Leviathans really were. Not monsters, but magnificent beings capable of love and loyalty. The hunt had begun, but Amy and Titan would face it together. News of Amy Carter and her void Leviathan companion spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. In the Zephyrian Empire's capital city, War Commander Vextal watched the smuggled footage with growing alarm. The massive reptilian aliens. Forearms gestured angrily as he addressed his council. "This human threatens everything we know about galactic security," Vextal hissed through his translator. "If one void Leviathan can be tamed, others might follow. We cannot allow these creatures to become weapons in human hands." On the human colony world of New Seattle, Dr. Carl Thompson sat in his cramped laboratory, studying the same footage frame by frame. Unlike the Zephyrians, Carl saw something miraculous in Amy's bond with the creature she called Titan. The gentle way the massive being held her, the protective behavior, the clear communication attempts. It all pointed to intelligence and emotion. "Computer, analyze the light patterns on the Leviathan scales during the feeding sequence," Carl said. "Pattern analysis complete. The sequences show mathematical progression consistent with complex communication attempts." Carl leaned back in his chair, amazed. The void Leviathans weren't just intelligent, they were trying to talk. And Amy Carter might be the first human to understand their language. Meanwhile, 3 parsecs away in the Kepler belt, Amy was learning that language firsthand. Titan had led her to a hidden cave inside a massive asteroid where they could rest safely. The Leviathan had somehow created an atmosphere pocket, though Amy kept her suit sealed just in case. "You're trying to tell me something important, aren't you?" Amy said, watching Titan's scales pulse with urgent blue patterns. The creature's great head nodded, an oddly human gesture that made Amy smile despite their situation. Titan's claws carefully traced shapes in the asteroid dust, creating symbols that looked almost like star maps. Amy pulled out her tablet and started recording everything. The symbols, the light patterns, even the way Titan moved his massive body to emphasize certain points. She was beginning to recognize that the blue patterns meant danger, while golden ones indicated safety or contentment. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by Aria's warning. "Amy, I'm detecting multiple ships approaching the asteroid field. They're not broadcasting identification signals." Through the cave opening, Amy could see running lights in the distance. Too many ships to count, coming from different directions. The hunt had found them. "Time to go, Titan," Amy whispered. The Leviathan's scales flashed red with understanding. He gently scooped Amy against his chest and propelled them out of the cave. As they emerged into open space, Amy gasped at what surrounded them. Zephyrian. Warships hung in space like angry insects, their weapons already charging. But they weren't alone. Human ships from 3 different colonies had joined the hunt, along with vessels from the Altarian Federation and the Centauri Trade Guild. It seemed like half the galaxy had come to kill her friend. "Attention, human vessel," came a transmission, in heavily accented English. "You will release the creature immediately or be destroyed along with it." Amy activated her suit's comm system. "This is Dr. Amy Carter. The being you're trying to kill is intelligent and peaceful. I won't let you hurt him." The response was a barrage of weapons fire. Titan twisted through space with impossible grace, dodging energy beams and missile clusters. Amy could feel the creature's fear and confusion through their bond. He didn't understand why so many different species wanted to destroy him. "They're herding us toward the asteroid belt's edge," Amy realized. In open space, Titan would be an easy target for their combined firepower. But Titan had other plans. Instead of fleeing toward empty space, he dove deeper into the asteroid field. The massive rocks provided cover, but they also created a deadly maze. One wrong move would smash them both against several tons of spinning stone. The hunting fleet followed, but their larger ships couldn't navigate the tight spaces as easily as Titan. Amy watched through her helmet display as 2 Zephyrian destroyers collided while trying to pursue them through a particularly narrow passage. "Your creature is leading us into a trap," one of the human captains transmitted. "He's trying to survive," Amy replied, "just like you would." For 3 hours, Titan led their pursuers through the asteroid maze. The Leviathan seemed to know every rock and crevice, swimming through space like he belonged there. Amy began to suspect this wasn't the first time Titan had hidden in this particular asteroid field. Dr. Carl Thompson, monitoring the chase from his lab, was recording everything. "Computer, analyze the Leviathan's movement patterns. Cross-reference with known asteroid belt surveys. Analysis complete. The creature is following paths that did not exist in our last survey 6 months ago. It appears to have modified the asteroid arrangements." Carl's eyes widened. "It's not just hiding in the asteroids. It's been reshaping them. This is tool use on a massive scale." Back in the chase, Amy was coming to the same conclusion. Titan wasn't randomly fleeing. He was following a planned route through passages he had created. The Leviathan had been preparing for this day, building an escape route through the rocks. "Look at the scorch marks on these asteroids," Amy told Aria. "Titan's been using his breath weapon to carve new passages. He's an engineer." They emerged from the asteroid field near the system's edge, where space was darker and colder. Amy expected Titan to make a run for deep space, but instead he stopped and turned to face their pursuers. His scales began to glow with patterns Amy had never seen before. Complex, beautiful sequences that pulsed like music made of light. "What are you doing?" Amy whispered. Titan's response was a sound that somehow carried through the vacuum to vibrate. Her suit. It was deep and mournful, like a whale song crossed with a prayer. And from the darkness beyond the asteroid field, other voices answered. More void leviathans emerged from the shadows. 5, then 10, then 20 massive forms swimming. Through space toward them, Amy's heart raced as she realized Titan had been calling for help. The hunting fleet stopped their pursuit, suddenly faced with an entire pod of the galaxy's most feared predators. Weapons powered up on both sides as the two forces faced each other across the dark space. But the Leviathans didn't attack. Instead, they formed a protective circle around Titan and Amy, their scales glowing with the same mournful patterns. It was clearly a goodbye. They're not staying to fight, Amy realized. They're saying farewell. One by one, the other Leviathans touched their snouts to Titans in what could only be described as kisses. Then they dispersed, swimming away into the dark between stars. Within minutes, only Titan and Amy remained, alone again against impossible odds. "Why didn't they help us fight?" Amy asked. Titan's scales showed a pattern Amy was beginning to recognize as sadness mixed with determination. The other Leviathans had their own responsibilities, their own territories to protect. Titan had chosen to stay with Amy, and that choice meant exile from his people. As the hunting fleet regrouped and prepared for another attack, Amy made her own choice. She activated her suit's emergency beacon, not to call for rescue, but to broadcast a message. "This is Dr. Amy Carter to all ships. I'm going to prove to you that void Leviathans are not monsters. Watch and learn." She turned to Titan and placed her hand on his great snout. "Show them who you really are, my friend. Show them your heart." The Leviathan's scales began to glow with the most beautiful patterns Amy had ever seen. Complex spirals of gold and silver that spoke of ancient wisdom, deep loneliness, and hope for understanding. It was art and language and emotion all combined into something that transcended species. Across the hunting fleet, beings of a dozen different races watched in wonder as one small human and one massive Leviathan created beauty in the darkness of space. Some would still choose to fight, but others would begin to question everything they thought they knew about monsters and heroes. The real hunt was just beginning, but now both sides had something to think about. 3 weeks of running had taken its toll on both Amy and Titan. Her food supplies were nearly gone, and the massive Leviathan was showing signs of exhaustion. The constant stress of dodging hunting fleets had worn them both down to the breaking. "Point! There!" Amy said, pointing to a faint signal on her scanner. "An old mining station. Maybe we can rest there." Titan's scales pulsed with tired agreement as they approached the derelict structure. The station had been abandoned for years, its hull scarred by meteor impacts and solar radiation. But the docking bay still had atmosphere, and more importantly, it was hidden in the shadow of a gas giant where their pursuers wouldn't think to look. As they entered the docking bay, Amy was surprised to see lights come on automatically. Someone was maintaining this place. Her hand moved to the emergency beacon on her suit, ready to call Titan if they were walking into a trap. "Well, I'll be damned," came a woman's voice over the comm system. "Never thought I'd see a void Leviathan up close and personal." A figure emerged from the shadows, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and oil-stained coveralls. She moved with the careful confidence of someone who'd spent years in low-gravity environments. "Name's Kate Williams," the woman said, studying them through. The transparent aluminum barrier that separated the bay from the station proper. "Used to be a terraforming engineer before I got tired of corporate politics. Now I fix things that need fixing and leave the galaxy alone." Amy floated closer to the barrier, keeping one hand on Titan's snout. The Leviathan was tense but not aggressive. "I'm Amy Carter. This is Titan. We need somewhere safe to rest." Kate's eyes moved between the small human and the massive creature. "I've been following the news feeds. Half the galaxy's looking for you, too. Mind telling me why you're not dead yet?" "Because Titan's not what they say he is. He's intelligent. Peaceful. He's been protecting me." "Protecting you?" Kate laughed. "Honey, that thing could swallow a battleship whole." As if to prove Amy's point, Titan carefully adjusted his position to shield her from a piece of falling debris that had shaken loose from the ceiling. The gesture was protective and gentle, completely at odds with his reputation as a galactic terror. Kate's expression softened. "Well, I'll be damned. Come on inside, both of you." The next few hours were a revelation. Kate's station was larger than it appeared from outside, with multiple levels connected by zero-gravity shafts. She'd been living here alone for 5 years, maintaining the old equipment and studying the local space phenomena. "The mining company found something weird in this system," Kate explained as she showed Amy around. "Strange energy readings from the gas giant's core. They packed up and left before they could figure out what it was." Amy was more interested in Titan's behavior. The Leviathan had explored the station thoroughly, his massive form somehow fitting through passages that seemed too small for him. Now he was floating in the main cargo bay, his scales pulsing with patterns Amy had never seen before. "Kate, look at this," Amy called excitedly. "He's trying to tell us something." The patterns on Titan's scales had become more complex, showing intricate geometric shapes that reminded Amy of star charts or mathematical equations. When she tried to record them with her tablet, Titan became agitated, repeatedly pointing with one claw toward the cargo bay's main display screen. "I think he wants to use the computer," Amy said. Kate shrugged. "Couldn't hurt to try." "Computer, activate main display and input sensors." Titan approached the screen carefully, then touched it with the tip of one claw. The display immediately came alive with swirling patterns of light that matched the ones on his scales. Amy gasped as she realized what she was seeing. "It's not random," she whispered. "The patterns repeat in sequences. This is language." For the next several hours, Amy and Kate worked together to decode Titan's communication. The Leviathan was patient, repeating sequences when they didn't understand and creating new ones to express different concepts. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. "He's showing us something about his people," Amy said, pointing to a section of the display. "See how this pattern keeps appearing? I think it represents void Leviathans as a group. The patterns told a story of ancient creatures who lived in the empty spaces between stars, feeding on cosmic radiation and dark matter. They were wanderers by nature, following currents of energy that flowed through the galaxy like rivers. But something was wrong with those energy currents. Titan's patterns showed disruption, chaos, darkness spreading through the cosmic rivers. And in that darkness, something else was moving, something hungry. "What is he trying to warn us about?" Kate asked. Titan's response was a pattern so complex. It hurt to look at directly. The shape seemed to writhe and consume the other patterns around it, leaving only emptiness behind. Amy felt a chill run down her spine as she watched the demonstration. "Something's coming," she whispered. "Something that eats everything in its path." Kate frowned at the display. Could that explain the energy readings from the gas giant? The mining company's reports mentioned fluctuations that didn't match any known phenomena. Titan's scales blazed with urgent blue patterns. He was clearly trying to confirm Kate's suspicion, but the concept was too complex for their limited communication system. That's when Amy had an idea. "Titan, can you show us? Physically show us what you mean?" The Leviathan's eyes lit up with understanding. He swam to the center of the cargo bay and began to move in slow, graceful patterns. His massive body twisted and flowed like a dancer. While his scales provided visual accompaniment to the performance, Amy watched in wonder as Titan acted out the story of his people. She saw the ancient Leviathans swimming through space, maintaining balance in the cosmic ecosystem. She saw the darkness arriving, consuming the energy currents and leaving dead zones behind, and she saw the Leviathans fighting back, sacrificing themselves to keep the darkness from spreading. "They're not destroyers," Amy breathed. "They're guardians. The colonies that were attacked, they weren't random targets. The Leviathans were trying to drive people away from danger zones." Kate studied the patterns on her computer screen. If that's true, then the galaxy's been hunting the wrong enemy. Those creatures were trying to protect us. Titan's performance ended with him floating near Amy, his scales showing patterns of deep sadness. Through their growing bond, Amy could feel his loneliness and frustration. His people had tried to communicate, tried to warn the galaxy about the coming darkness, but all they'd received in return was fear and violence. "How long do we have?" Amy asked gently. Titan's response was a countdown pattern that made Amy's blood run cold. The darkness was already moving through the outer regions of the galaxy, following the same energy currents that the Leviathans used for navigation. At its current rate of spread, it would reach populated systems within months. "We have to warn people," Amy said. "We have to make them understand." Kate was already working at her computer. "I've got long-range communication equipment, but it'll take time to reach the core worlds. And even if we get through, who's going to believe a story about cosmic monsters told by a woman hiding with a void Leviathan?" "Someone has to believe," Amy insisted. "The alternative is too terrible to consider." As if in response to her words, Titan's scales began to glow with a new pattern, one that somehow conveyed hope mixed with determination. The massive creature swam closer to Amy and gently wrapped one claw around her waist. Through their bond, Amy felt Titan's resolve. He had found something precious in the galaxy, a being who could understand him, who saw past his fearsome appearance to the intelligence and compassion beneath. He would fight for that connection and for the chance to save both their peoples. From the darkness coming between the stars, Amy placed her hand on Titan's snout and made her own promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The galaxy might see her as a traitor and him as a monster, but together they represented something new. A bridge between species that could survive anything. In the hidden sanctuary of Kate's station, 3 unlikely allies began to plan for a war that most of the galaxy didn't even know was coming. Amy woke to the sound of Titan's distress call echoing through the station's hull. The deep, mournful song made the metal walls vibrate and sent chills down her spine. She'd never heard him make that sound before. It was primal, urgent, filled with longing. "Kate!" Amy called as she pulled on her emergency suit. "Something's wrong with Titan!" Kate's voice crackled over the intercom from the control room. "It's not just Titan. I'm reading massive energy signatures approaching the system. Multiple contacts, all huge." Amy rushed to the cargo bay where Titan floated near the main viewport, his scales blazing with patterns of blue and silver. His great head was tilted back, and the song that poured from his throat seemed to carry across impossible distances. "What are you calling for?" Amy whispered, placing her hand on his flank. Through their bond, she felt his answer. Family, hope, a desperate need for connection with his own kind. Amy's heart sank as she realized what was happening. Titan's distress calls had finally been answered, and his people were coming. "Amy, you need to see this," Kate called from the observation deck. Amy joined Kate at the main scanner display and gasped. 7 massive forms were approaching the station, each one easily as large as Titan. Void leviathans, swimming through space with the graceful power that had made them legends throughout the galaxy. "They're beautiful," Amy breathed, watching. "The creatures move in perfect formation. They're also armed," Kate pointed out. "Look at those energy readings. Each one of those things could vaporize this station without breaking a sweat." Amy felt a stab of fear, not for herself, but for Titan. What if his people rejected him for consorting with humans? What if they saw her as a threat and demanded he choose between his species and his bond with her? The lead Leviathan was larger than the others, its scales bearing intricate patterns that spoke of age and authority. As it approached the station, its voice joined Titan's song in harmonies that made Amy's bones ache with their beauty. Titan's response was immediate and joyful. His scales blazed with golden patterns as he rushed toward the docking bay, eager to greet his people. Amy followed, her heart pounding with uncertainty. The eldest Leviathan entered the bay slowly, its massive form barely fitting through the opening. Amy could see intelligence in its ancient eyes as it studied her through the observation window. Then, to her amazement, the creature's scales began to pulse with the same greeting patterns Titan had taught her. "It's trying to communicate," Amy whispered. Kate activated the bay's external speakers. "Go ahead, Amy. Talk to it." Amy approached the window slowly, her hands trembling as she activated her suit's external lights. She flashed the pattern for friend. 3 quick pulses followed by a steady glow. The response was immediate. The elder Leviathan's scales rippled, with what could only be described as amusement. Over the next hour, more Leviathans entered the station's various bays. Amy was amazed by their diversity. Some bore scars from ancient battles. Others had scales that sparkled like jewels. And one appeared to be barely more than a juvenile. But all of them showed the same careful intelligence when interacting with the station's systems. Dr. Nick Foster would have given anything to witness what Amy was experiencing. The xenopsychologist had been tracking Leviathan movements for years, from his research post on Titan Station, building theories about their social structure. Now Amy was seeing those theories proven firsthand. The eldest Leviathan, Amy decided to call her grandmother based on her obvious matriarchal role, began sharing complex pattern sequences with Titan. Amy could only understand fragments, but the emotional content was clear. Relief at finding him safe, concern about his choices, and curiosity about the small human who had somehow earned his loyalty. "They're not angry," Amy realized with relief. "They're worried about him." Through the growing conversation, Amy began to piece together the Leviathan social structure. They lived in family groups called pods, with the eldest female serving as both leader and memory keeper. Each pod was responsible for patrolling a section of the galaxy, monitoring the energy currents that flowed between stars. But something was disrupting those patrols. Grandmother's patterns showed images of pods going silent, entire regions of space going dark. The shadow entities that Titan had warned about were spreading faster than anyone had realized. "We need to get this information to the authorities," Kate said urgently. "If the Leviathan's patrol network is breaking down, the whole galaxy's in danger." Amy was about to agree when Grandmother's attention focused on her with laser intensity. The elder Leviathan began a new pattern sequence, one that felt like a test or challenge. Amy recognized some of the symbols from her conversations with Titan, but others were completely new. "She's asking me something important," Amy said. "Something about choice? Loyalty?" Titan swam closer to Amy's window, his scales adding supporting patterns to Grandmother's message. Slowly, Amy began to understand. The pod had come not just to check on Titan, but to evaluate the human who had changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy's younger races. "They want to know if I'm worthy of their trust," Amy whispered. Kate looked at the scanner readings showing 7 of the galaxy's most powerful predators surrounding their tiny station. "Amy, whatever they're asking, you might want to say yes." But Amy knew it wasn't that simple. Grandmother's patterns were asking for more than just words. She wanted to see into Amy's heart, to understand the motivations that had driven her to risk everything for a creature most of her species considered a monster. Amy closed her eyes and thought about the moment she'd first seen Titan trapped in, the wreckage. The pain in his golden eyes, the careful way he'd accepted her help, the trust that had grown between them despite every logical reason for fear. She thought about the nights they'd spent together in the asteroid caves, learning each other's languages and sharing their loneliness. When she opened her eyes, Amy began to tell their story through patterns of light. She started with the rescue, showing her decision to feed an injured creature instead of fleeing in fear. She showed their growing communication, their narrow escapes from hunting fleets, and the gradual understanding that had bloomed between 2 impossible friends. The other. Leviathans watched in fascination as Amy's crude light patterns were supplemented by Titan's more sophisticated displays. Together they painted a picture of connection that transcended species barriers. Grandmother's response was a pattern so complex it took Amy several minutes to understand. But when the meaning became clear, tears began flowing down her cheeks. "She's calling me pack-bonded," Amy whispered. "I'm not just Titan's friend, I'm family." The implications hit Amy like a physical blow. The Leviathans didn't form casual friendships. When they accepted someone as pack-bonded, it was for life. Grandmother wasn't just acknowledging Amy's relationship with Titan. She was formally adopting a human into a void Leviathan family. Kate whistled softly. "Amy, do you realize what this means? You're not just the first human to communicate with Leviathans. You're the first to be accepted as one of them." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in human experience. Each member of the pod approached Amy's window in turn, sharing patterns that felt like blessings, promises, and gifts. The youngest Leviathan, barely larger than Titan, showed patterns of playful curiosity that reminded Amy of a child meeting a new aunt. When it was over, Amy found herself part of something vast and ancient. The pod's collective memories stretched back millions of years, filled with wonders and horrors beyond human imagination. And now she was connected to all of it through bonds that transcended biology. "The galaxy's about to change," Amy said softly, watching her new family swim through the station's bays with casual power. "When word gets out that humans can bond with leviathans, everything we thought we knew about interspecies relations will be thrown out the window. But first, they had a war to prevent. Grandmother's patterns had made it clear that the shadow entities were moving faster than expected. The Outer Rim territories were already falling silent, their energy signatures, consumed by something that left only void behind." Amy placed her hand on the window and looked into Titan's golden eyes. She was no longer just a marine biologist trying to save an injured animal. She was pack-bonded to a family of cosmic guardians, and together they had to find a way to save the galaxy from an enemy that most people didn't even know existed. The real battle was about to begin, but for the first time since this all started, Amy felt like she might not be fighting alone. The revelation came through shared memories so ancient they predated human civilization by millions of years. Amy floated in the station's modified cargo bay, her consciousness somehow linked to grandmother's vast mind through patterns of light and bioelectric resonance that science couldn't yet explain. She saw the galaxy as it had been eons ago, young, wild, filled with energy currents that flowed like rivers between the stars. And swimming in those currents were the first leviathans, massive beings who fed on cosmic radiation and maintained the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish. But from the dark spaces beyond the galaxy's edge, something else was watching, waiting. The Devourers, grandmother's patterns whispered in Amy's mind. Entities of pure hunger that exist in the void between galaxies. Through the shared memory, Amy watched in horror as the first scouts arrived. They weren't physical beings in any sense humans could understand. They were living absence, areas of space where matter, energy, and even the concept of existence simply stopped. Where they passed, stars went out not by exploding or burning out, but by ceasing to have ever existed at all. "My God," Amy whispered aloud, her voice shaking in the station's recycled air. "They don't just destroy things, they erase them from reality itself." The ancient Leviathans had fought back with everything they had. Amy witnessed battles that spanned centuries, where entire pods of the massive creatures threw themselves into the void to seal breaches in reality's fabric. Many were lost, their sacrifice the only thing that kept the Devourers from consuming the entire galaxy. "The attacks on the colonies," Amy said, understanding flooding through her. "The Leviathans weren't being aggressive, they were trying to evacuate populated areas." Titan's patterns confirmed her realization. For the past century, his people had been detecting the approaching return of the Devourers. The energy currents that sustained galactic life were weakening, creating gaps that the shadow entities could exploit. Every time the Leviathans tried to warn other species by driving them away from vulnerable areas, they were met with violence and fear. Kate, monitoring the communication from the station's control room, was frantically recording everything. "Amy, the implications of this are staggering. If these Devourers are real, every species in the galaxy needs to know." But even as Kate worked to compile their evidence, warnings were already coming in from the Outer Rim territories. Helen Garcia, a communications specialist on the frontier world of Haven's Edge, had been tracking strange signal anomalies for weeks. Entire star systems were going silent, their transmissions not cutting off but simply stopping, as if they had never existed in the first place. "Control, this is Haven's Edge," Helen broadcast on emergency frequencies. "We're detecting massive gravitational anomalies moving inward from Galactic Rim. Recommend immediate evacuation of outer colonies. Her warnings fell on deaf ears. The Galactic Council was too busy organizing hunting fleets to chase down Amy and her tamed monster to pay attention to reports of cosmic phenomena. Admiral Lisa Brooks had convinced them that the real threat was the possibility of void leviathans being weaponized by human colonies. Through grandmother's memories, Amy saw the truth. The galaxy's governments were so focused on the imaginary threat of Leviathan attacks that they were ignoring the real enemy approaching from beyond the stars. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the people who could save them were being hunted as criminals. "We have to make them listen," Amy said desperately. "There has to be a way to prove what's coming." Grandmother's response was a pattern sequence that made Amy's blood run cold. The eldest Leviathan was showing her the current state of the galaxy's outer defenses. Scout devourers had already breached the rim territories, consuming entire systems so completely that even their gravitational signatures vanished from space. The main force was still months away, but their advance guard was already feeding on the galaxy's life force. "The energy currents are failing," Amy translated. "The network that connects all living systems is being severed piece by piece." Kate's scanner display suddenly lit up with alerts. "Amy, you need to see this. I'm detecting another energy signature approaching the system. It's not Leviathan." The signature was wrong in ways that hurt to contemplate. It registered on sensors as a presence that wasn't there, a shadow cast by something that didn't exist. As it drew closer, the station's lights began to flicker, and the Leviathan's scales shifted to warning patterns of deep red and black. "It's a scout," Amy realized with growing horror. "One of the devourers found us." Through the station's external cameras, they watched something impossible approach through space. It looked like a hole in reality itself, not black, but simply absent. Where it passed, stars dimmed, and cosmic background radiation faded to nothing. The Leviathan pod reacted immediately. Without hesitation, 3 of the massive creatures swam directly toward the approaching void. Amy watched in anguish as they disappeared into the nothingness, their bioluminescent displays going dark one by one. But their sacrifice worked. The scout entity seemed to pause, then began to retreat back toward the galaxy's edge. The remaining Leviathans pursued it part way, ensuring it couldn't return to threaten the station. "They just saved our lives," Kate whispered, staring at the empty space where 3 magnificent beings had been moments before. "And we didn't even know we were in danger." Amy felt the pod's grief through her bond with them. The loss of family members was a pain that transcended species barriers. But mixed with the sorrow was fierce determination. The Leviathans had been fighting this war for millions of years, and they would continue fighting until either they or the devourers were completely destroyed. That's why they seem so aggressive to other species, Amy realized. They're constantly on the edge of battle, always ready to sacrifice themselves to protect the galaxy. We've been calling them monsters when they're actually heroes, grandmothers. Patterns shifted to show Amy something even more disturbing. The scouts' attack hadn't been random. The devourers were specifically targeting areas where Leviathans and other species were working together. They saw Amy's bond with Titan as a particular threat to their plans. "They're afraid of cooperation," Amy said. "The devourers want the galaxy species to remain isolated and suspicious of each other. A united defense might actually be able to stop them." Kate was already working at her communication array. "Then we give them cooperation whether they want it or not. Helen, are you still monitoring emergency frequencies?" Helen Garcia's voice crackled across space from Haven's edge. "I'm here, Kate. What's your status?" We have proof of the real threat facing the galaxy. Uploading data now." Over the next hour, Kate transmitted everything they had learned about the Devourers. Technical specifications, Leviathan historical records, and most importantly, footage of the Scouts' attack on their station. Helen immediately began relaying the information to every system within communication range. "Some people are listening," Helen reported. "The frontier colonies are already implementing evacuation procedures, but the core worlds think it's a hoax designed to distract from the Leviathan threat." Amy looked at her pod family, seeing the exhaustion in their ancient eyes. They had been fighting alone for so long, misunderstood and hunted by the very people they were trying to protect. The weight of their sacrifice was almost overwhelming. "Not anymore," Amy said firmly. "From now on, they have allies." Titan swam closer to her observation window, his scales showing patterns of gratitude and hope. Through their bond, Amy felt the shared determination of the entire pod. They had found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. They had found understanding. The galaxy might not believe the warnings yet, but that would change. Amy had seen the enemy with her own eyes, felt the cold hunger that sought to devour all existence. She would find a way to make people listen, even if it meant putting herself directly in harm's way. The real war was about to begin, and this time the Leviathans wouldn't be fighting alone. They had humans on their side, stubborn, compassionate, impossibly brave humans who refused to abandon their friends no matter how terrifying those friends appeared to be. In the darkness between stars, ancient hunger stirred at the scent of cooperation. The Devourers had consumed 1,000 galaxies by keeping their prey divided and afraid. But this galaxy might be different. This galaxy had learned to see past appearances to the courage beneath. The outcome was far from certain, but for the first time in millions of years, the Defenders had hope. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from 47 different species filled the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, their voices raised in heated argument as footage from the Devourer. Scout attack played on the main screens. President Maria Santos of the Human Colonial Union stood at the central podium, her dark eyes blazing with determination. "The evidence is undeniable. Dr. Carter's data shows clear proof that Void Leviathans are not our enemy. They're our defenders against something far worse." Admiral Lisa Brooks shot to her feet, her uniform crisp despite the chaos around them. "This is an elaborate deception designed to make us lower our guard against the Leviathan threat. One human's supposed bond with a creature means nothing, but not everyone was convinced by the Admiral's arguments. Captain Jake Morrison had arrived 3 hours earlier with more evidence, including scanner logs from the attack on Kate's station. The data was impossible to fake. It showed 3 Leviathans sacrificing themselves to drive away something that registered as pure absence on every sensor array. "I've fought Void Leviathans," declared Admiral Steve Parker, his scarred face grim with memory. "Lost good people to their attacks. But I've never seen anything like this Devourer entity. If Carter's right, we've been shooting at the wrong target for decades." The debate raged for hours while technicians analyzed the transmitted data. Xenobiologists compared Leviathan behavioral patterns with historical attack records. Physicists struggled to understand sensors readings that seemed to violate basic laws of reality, and communications specialists worked frantically to re-establish contact with the outer rim territories that had gone silent. Helen Garcia's voice cut through the chaos from her monitoring station on Haven's Edge. "Council members, I'm detecting Massive energy disruptions in Sector 7, multiple star systems showing gravitational anomalies consistent with the Devourer signatures. The main display switched to a galactic map showing the outer rim territories. Red zones spread like an infection across dozens of star systems, each one representing billions of lives that had simply vanished from all detection networks. "It's moving faster," President Santos said quietly. "Whatever's out there, it's accelerating its approach." Dr. Carl Thompson, who had been studying Leviathan communications for months, stood to address the council. "Based on my analysis of Dr. Carter's linguistic data, the creatures are trying to establish defensive cordons around population centers. Every attack we've attributed to Leviathan aggression was actually an attempt to evacuate civilians from vulnerable areas." A Zephyrian representative's translator crackled to life. "War Commander Vextal wishes to know how we can trust beings that have destroyed our colonies." "Because they didn't destroy them," Carl replied. "They drove your people away before the real threat could arrive. The Leviathans saved those colonies, not attacked them." The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. If the xenobiologist was right, then the galaxy's greatest protectors had been hunted and killed for trying to save lives. The weight of that realization settled over the assembled representatives like a funeral shroud. "We need to contact Dr. Carter immediately," President Santos declared. "If these Leviathans are willing to work with humans, she might be our only hope of establishing broader communication." But even as the council debated, that communication was already taking place in the hidden asteroid station where Amy had made her home with Titan's pod. Through her growing bond with grandmother, Amy was learning to access the vast network of Leviathan consciousness that spanned the galaxy. "There are hundreds of them," Amy reported to Kate over their secure channel. "Pods spread across every sector, all connected through some kind of bioelectric field. They've been coordinating a galaxy-wide defense for millennia." The view through the shared consciousness was overwhelming. Amy could feel the presence of Leviathans she would never meet, creatures ancient beyond human comprehension, who carried the memories of 1,000,000 battles against the void. Each pod was a node in a vast neural network dedicated to protecting organic life from threats beyond imagination. "The Devourers aren't just hungry," Amy explained to the growing audience listening to her transmissions. "They're intelligent. They've developed strategies specifically designed to turn their prey against each other, divide and conquer on a galactic scale." Through grandmother's memories, Amy saw how it had worked in other galaxies. The Devourers would send scouts to identify the strongest defenders, then manipulate events to make other species fear and attack those defenders. By the time the main force arrived, their prey would be weakened by internal conflict and unable to mount an effective resistance. "It's happening here too," Amy realized with growing horror. "The attacks that made us fear the Leviathans, some of them might have been influenced by Devourer manipulation. They've been playing us against our own protectors." The implications were staggering. If the Devourers had been manipulating galactic politics for decades, then half the conflicts and fears that divided the species might be artificially created. The great predator they all feared might actually be their greatest hope for survival. Kate's voice was tight with urgency as she monitored incoming transmissions. "Amy, the Council's trying to reach us. They want to establish formal communication, protocols." "Tell them I'll talk," Amy said. "But not to me alone. They need to speak with grandmother directly." The first formal communication between the Galactic Council and a void Leviathan took place over subspace transmission networks that had never carried such impossible conversations. Amy served as translator, her consciousness somehow bridging the gap between human language and the complex pattern communications of the Leviathans. Grandmother's first message to the galaxy was simple. We are the Guardians. We have always been the Guardians. The darkness comes, and we stand against it as we have for millions of cycles. But now, for the first time, we are not alone. President Santos spoke for the assembled council. What do you need from us? The answer came in patterns that Amy translated with growing excitement. Coordination. The Leviathans have been fighting this war in isolation, each pod defending its territory alone. But the Devourers have grown stronger. They need allies who can think differently, fight differently. What can we do against entities that erase matter from existence? Admiral Parker asked. Grandmother's response was a complex pattern that took Amy several minutes to interpret. The Devourers feed on life energy, but they can be disrupted by certain frequencies of organized thought. That's why they fear cooperation. Unified consciousness creates interference patterns they can't consume. Dr. Carl Thompson leaned forward eagerly. Are you saying that coordinated mental activity can actually damage these entities? Not damage, Amy corrected. Confuse, delay, give the Leviathans time to establish containment fields, but it requires perfect synchronization across multiple species, the kind of cooperation that has never existed in this galaxy. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just being asked to work with the Leviathans. They were being asked to trust each other completely. Humans, Zephyrians, Altarians, Centaurians, and dozens of other species would have to link their minds in perfect harmony to create a weapon made of pure cooperation. How do we know it will work? Asked the Centaurian delegate. Grandmother's answer came with a memory flash so powerful it reached every consciousness in the chamber. They saw a galaxy far away, consumed by devourers after its species failed to unite. They saw the final moments as proud civilizations fell one by one, too proud and fearful to trust their former enemies. Because, Amy translated quietly, we've seen what happens when it doesn't. The vote was closer than it should have been, but it passed. The Galactic Defense Coalition was formed that day, with President Santos as its civilian head and Admiral Parker as military commander. More importantly, Dr. Amy Carter was appointed as the first official Leviathan ambassador, with full authority to coordinate between human and Leviathan forces. As the council session ended and representatives rushed to implement evacuation and defense protocols, Amy floated in her asteroid station and felt the weight of impossible responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was no longer just a marine biologist who had saved an injured animal. She was the bridge between species that had never trusted each other, the translator for a conversation that would determine the fate of an entire galaxy. Titan swam closer to her observation window, his scales glowing with patterns of love and confidence. Through their bond, Amy felt the support not just of her immediate pod family, but of hundreds of Leviathans across the galaxy. She was pack-bonded now to guardians older than human civilization, and they believed she could help save everything they had spent millions of years protecting. The real battle was still to come, but for the first time since the crisis began, the galaxy's defenders were working together instead of against each other. It might not be enough to stop the Devourers, but it was more hope than anyone had dared imagine just hours before. In the darkness between stars, ancient hunger sensed the change and quickened its approach. The galaxy was learning to cooperate, which made it both more dangerous and more delicious. the feast would be. 6 months after the Battle of the Void, Amy Carter floated in the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching Titan play with 3 young Leviathans in the specially designed habitat pods. The massive creatures moved, with the grace of dolphins, their scales flickering with patterns of joy and contentment. "Hard to believe they were considered monsters just a year ago," said Dr. Tony Clark, Amy's assistant and the galaxy's second certified Leviathan translator. He was still learning the complex pattern language, but his enthusiasm made up for his occasional mistakes. Amy smiled as she watched Titan gently guide the youngsters through a communication exercise. The babies, each one larger than most starships, were learning basic patterns like safe, family, and home. Their innocent play was a stark contrast to the cosmic horror they had all faced just months before. The Battle of the Void had been closer than anyone wanted to admit. When the main devourer force finally arrived at the galaxy's edge, it had brought hundreds of the reality-consuming entities. The coordinated defense that followed involved every species in the galaxy, with Leviathan pods working alongside fleets of traditional warships in the first truly cooperative military action in galactic history. Amy remembered the moment when everything changed. She had been serving as a communication hub, her consciousness linked to both the human command structure and the Leviathan tactical network. As the Devourers advanced, consuming entire star systems in their path, the defending forces had to make impossible choices about which worlds to save and which to sacrifice. That's when Grandmother had made her final gift to the galaxy. The ancient Leviathan had shared her complete memory archive, millions of years of experience fighting the Devourers, with every consciousness in the defense network. For one brief shining moment, humans, Zephyrians, Altarians, and dozens of other species had thought with the wisdom of ages. The coordinated mental interference that resulted had been beyond anything the Devourers had encountered before. The synchronized thoughts of a billion minds had created resonance patterns that disrupted the entity's ability to consume organized matter. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers had retreated rather than advancing. But the victory had come at a cost. Grandmother and 200 other elder Leviathans had sacrificed themselves to create the psychic framework that made the defense possible. Amy still felt the ache of that loss, though Titan assured her through their bond that the elders considered it a worthy trade. "Ambassador Carter?" The voice belonged to Captain Jake Morrison. Now Admiral Morrison, thanks to his role in coordinating human forces during the battle. "The council representatives have arrived for the ceremony." Amy nodded and made her way to the station's main conference room, where delegates from across the galaxy had gathered to sign the Leviathan Accord. The document would formalize the relationship between Void Leviathans and the galactic community, establishing protected corridors where the massive creatures could patrol for remaining Devourer scouts while avoiding populated systems. President Maria Santos stood as Amy entered the room. "Dr. Carter, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you again for everything you've done. Your courage in defending Titan when the rest of us saw only a monster change the course of history." "I didn't do anything special," Amy replied, though she accepted the applause from the assembled delegates. "I just saw someone who needed help and couldn't walk away." Admiral Steve Parker, whose fleet had lost 30 ships in the final battle, shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short, Ambassador. Your decision to trust instead of fear saved billions of lives. That's not ordinary. That's heroic." The signing ceremony was brief but meaningful. Each species representative added their mark to the accord. formally acknowledging the Leviathans as protectors rather than threats. More importantly, they established the framework for ongoing cooperation between species that had barely trusted each other just months before. After the ceremony, Amy returned to the observation deck to find Titan waiting for her. The massive Leviathan had grown since their first meeting, his scales now bearing the complex patterns that marked him as a full adult, but his golden eyes still held the same gentle intelligence that had first convinced Amy to help him. The youngsters are asking about Earth, Titan's patterns conveyed through the translation system they'd developed. They want to know about the world that taught their pod sister compassion. Amy laughed at the thought of baby Leviathans being curious about her home planet. Tell them Earth is small and blue, with oceans full of creatures that sing like they do? Maybe someday they can visit? The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it sounded. Already, some human colonies were requesting Leviathan protection for their systems, and several pods had volunteered to serve as guardians for vulnerable worlds. The relationship that had started with one injured creature and one compassionate human was growing into something that would reshape galactic civilization. Dr. Tony Clark joined them at the observation window, his tablet full of notes from the day's language lessons. Amy, I've been thinking about what you said during your speech at the council, about seeing past appearances to find the truth underneath. Do you think humans are naturally better at that than other species? Amy considered the question while watching the young Leviathans practice their swimming patterns. I don't think it's specifically human. I think it's what happens when you're willing to risk being vulnerable. Most species, including humans, spend so much energy protecting themselves that they never learn to truly see others. But you saw Titan. I saw someone in pain who needed help. Everything else came after. Amy placed her hand on the window, and Titan's massive eye appeared on the other side, looking directly at her. The funny thing is, I thought I was saving him, but he's the one who saved me. Through their bond, Amy felt Titan's amusement at her words. The Leviathan's response was a pattern sequence that had become their private joke. Small human thinks too much. Pack bond is pack bond. No saving needed. The months that followed were busy ones for Amy and her team. The Leviathan Protection. Corps was established with bases throughout the galaxy, staffed by volunteers from every major species. Amy traveled constantly, teaching new translators and helping establish communication protocols between human settlements and their Leviathan guardians. The work was exhausting but rewarding. Every successful first contact between a nervous colony and a protective Leviathan pod proved that cooperation was possible. The barriers between species weren't insurmountable. They just required patience, understanding, and the willingness to see past fear to the truth underneath. There were still challenges, of course. Some groups continued to view the Leviathans with suspicion, and occasional incidents required careful diplomatic intervention. But for every problem that arose, there were dozens of success stories. Leviathan pods helping evacuate colonies threatened by natural disasters. Human engineering teams working with Leviathans to restore damaged cosmic energy networks. Children of multiple species learning pattern language alongside their native tongues. The galaxy was changing, one relationship at a time. As Amy stood in her observation deck one evening, watching Titan and his family swim through the stars, she reflected on how far they'd all come. She was no longer the frightened marine biologist who had stumbled across an injured creature in a derelict station. She was the galaxy's first Leviathan ambassador, a bridge between species that had learned to see each other as family rather than threats. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message from Helen Garcia, now director of the early warning network that monitored for signs of returning devourer activity. "Amy, we're detecting some unusual energy signatures in the outer arm. Probably nothing but worth keeping an eye on." Amy forwarded the data to Titan's pod network and received immediate confirmation that Leviathan scouts were already investigating. The galaxy's defenders were still vigilant, still ready to face whatever threats might emerge from the darkness between stars. But now they faced those threats together, with the strength that came from understanding and trust. The monsters of legend had become the guardians of reality, and the small acts of compassion that connected them had grown into bonds that could survive anything. In the end, that's what saved the galaxy, not advanced weapons or superior strategy, but the simple recognition that every being capable of thought and feeling deserved to be treated with kindness. Amy Carter had fed the galaxy's apex predator, and in return, she had gained a family that spanned the stars. As Titan's scales glowed, with patterns of contentment and love, Amy knew that whatever the future brought, they would face it together. The pack bond that had started with emergency rations shared in the wreckage of a space station had become something that would endure for generations. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and terrors beyond imagination. But it was also home to creatures who would sacrifice everything to protect those they loved, and beings small enough to show kindness to something they didn't understand. In the end, that was enough to save everything.